Coming up on I'm Right with Jesse Kelly, a woman who's more right than Jesse Kelly. I'm Liz Wheeler. Let's get this started. Tonight on I'm Right with Jesse Kelly, critical race theory is Marxism. Make no mistake, those defending it are Marxists. Who am I talking about tonight? I'm talking about former Virginia governor and current candidate for governor, Terry McAuliffe, who answered a question about critical race theory while on the campaign trail, calling parental concerns about critical race theory being taught in public schools a conspiracy theory. Take a look.
So I, listened to what you're saying about education. I was just wondering, with all the Republicans are talking about critical race theory, and they're making this huge deal about it, and it's all the conversation in the news with Virginia. What are you going to say to all those people making education about that?
That's another right-wing conspiracy.
Okay.
This is totally made up by Donald Trump and Glenn Youngkin. This is who they are. It's a conspiracy theory.
A conspiracy theory, he says. Well, if the left says it's conspiracy theory, you can be pretty sure it's probably true, and they definitely don't want you to know about it. Terry McAuliffe, radical leftist, is not the only one on the left trying to camouflage the reality of the Marxist critical race theory. The ACLU also says the Republican Party, the GOP, wants to ban talking about racism in school. This is their quote. They're talking about critical race theory, of course. They say, quote, "A nationwide attempt to censor discussion of race in the classroom is underway. In recent weeks, Republican lawmakers across the country have proposed bills banning teaching divisive concepts in K-12 public schools and in public colleges and universities. The new bills target efforts to provide education about gender and race discrimination, including critical race theory, an academic concept and practice that recognizes systemic racism is deeply ingrained in American society and examines how our systems promote inequality. Now, state lawmakers are attempting to use these bills to bar educators from teaching critical race theory and related concepts like white privilege and racial equity in schools. These bills don't just set back progress in addressing systemic issues, they also rob young people of an inclusive education and blatantly suppress speech about race." End quote. Again, make no mistake, critical race theory is racist. Of course it is. It teaches everyone to look at other people and other things, everything through the prism of race. But it's not just racialism. It's actually Marxism. If you travel back to the founding of critical race theory, that's what you'll find. It's actually not a theory at all. It's not a perspective on history, like the ACLU says. It's certainly not a conspiracy theory of the right wing. It might be a conspiracy of the left because it's Marxism. So let's take a look at the founding of critical race theory. It was actually founded in the Frankfurt School in Germany. The Frankfurt School, in 1937, the second director of the Frankfurt School, named Max Horkheimer, wrote a manifesto on critical theory. Critical theory is what I would call the grandfather of critical race theory. It went critical theory, critical legal studies, critical race theory. Now, critical theory teaches that there is no such thing as objective truth. No, they say that everything is just a competing political narrative. They're trying to destroy objective truth. They divide everyone into groups of oppressors or oppressed in classic Marxist fashion. Critical theory teaches that the oppressed stand in the way of a Marxist revolution when they adhere to the societal norms and institutions of their so-called oppressors. So, critical theory teaches that these institutions, an impediment to a Marxist revolution, must be destroyed by relentless criticism. Hence the name, critical theory. So by the 1930s, these Marxists at the Frankfurt School realized that Karl Marx's vision of a worker-led revolution wasn't going to happen, right? It simply wasn't happening. So Antonio Gramsci, the founder of the Italian Communist Party, he blamed the workers themselves for this. He said, and he took critical theory one step further, saying that these workers needed to be re-educated. Meanwhile, those at the Frankfurt School had to flee Germany because of the Nazi regime. They found refuge at Columbia University here in the United States. And when they returned to Germany after the fall of the Nazi regime, they left behind in the United States one of their associates, Herbert Marcuse. It was Marcuse who identified a new worker in the Marxist revolution: racial minorities. Now remember, the goal of critical theory and critical race theory was, is, and always has been a Marxist revolution. The racialism, viewing everyone through the prism of race, reducing everyone to their skin color, is just a tactic to tear down American institutions, to usher in a Marxist society. Now, this poisonous ideology has infiltrated our society. We know this. It's infiltrated public schools. We've seen parents across the country stand up and speak out and condemn this. In fact, even a survivor of Mao's communist China has warned that critical race theory is communism. Take a look.
I've been very alarmed about what's going on in our school. You are now training our children to be social justice warriors and to loathe our country and our history. Growing up in Mao's China, all this seemed very familiar. The communist regime used the same critical theory to divide people. The only difference is they use class instead of race. During the Cultural Revolution, I witnessed students and teachers turn against each other. We changed school names to be politically correct. We were taught to denounce our heritage. The Red Guards destroy anything that is not communist, old statues, books, and anything else. We are also encouraged to report on each other, just like the Student Equity Ambassador Program and the bias reporting system. This is indeed the American version of the Chinese Cultural Revolution. The critical race theory has its roots in cultural Marxism. It should have no place in our schools.
If that doesn't give you the chills, then I don't know what will. Critical race theory is Marxism, just instead of class, it uses race. And those who would deny it, those who would try to hide it, to camouflage it, to lie to you about it, should be asked the following questions. They should first be asked, can you define critical race theory? What is it? Because oftentimes you'll find they can't answer that. They should be asked, do you think it's racist to judge someone based solely on the color of that person's skin? And if so, isn't critical race theory racist? Since that's what it teaches. They should be asked, who was the architect of critical theory, the grandfather of critical race theory? The obvious answer to that is Max Horkheimer, Antonio Gramsci, and Herbert Marcuse. If they can't answer that, that's a problem. Proponents of critical race theory should be asked, what is the goal of critical theory? What is the goal of critical race theory? The answer to that is obviously Marxism, by way of tearing down the social institutions and beliefs adhered to by the so-called oppressed that supposedly prevent them from revolting. Adherents to critical race theory should be asked, can you describe the difference between equality and equity? This is a very serious difference, as equality means equal opportunity and equity means equal outcome, which requires discrimination against someone based on an immutable characteristic. Adherents to critical race theory should be asked, do you believe America is fundamentally good or evil? There's a big difference between saying good with flaws or evil and illegitimate. Now, with me now to discuss this, Congressman Chip Roy from the great state of Texas. Congressman, good to see you, sir.
Liz, great to see you. It's a big upgrade on having to look at Jesse Kelly.
And I'll make sure to pass that along to him. You can be sure of that. Congressman reacts to Governor McAuliffe saying that critical race theory and parental concerns in public schools is a right-wing conspiracy theory.
Well, do you remember that opening scene in My Cousin Vinny when Joe Pesci's character says to the prosecutor over there, he goes over to the jury, he says, everything that guy just said is BS, except to use the full word. That's my response to Terry McAuliffe. That's my response to Democrats. Look, they're burying their head in the sand because the American people now have seen what's going on in the corrupt public education system. The veil has been lifted. If there's one upside to this ridiculousness of the last year under COVID, a whole nother conversation, it's that the American people have now seen what their kids have been being taught, and they're outraged by it, and properly so. I would ask the governor, I'd ask Terry McAuliffe, if this bothers him or not. In Evanston, Illinois, students listened to Not My Idea, a book about whiteness, which states that whiteness is a bad deal and always was, and that you can be white without signing on to whiteness. In Cupertino, California, third graders were required to deconstruct their radical identities and then rank themselves according to their power and privilege. I could go through a laundry list of these things. We could go over to the fella in Space Force who was fired because he raised issues about critical race theory. Look, this is going on every single day in our schools. It's going on in the bowels of our deep state government. It's going on in the bowels of the Department of Defense. Instead of teaching our military to kill people and blow things up, which is what we want our military to do, they're being radically indoctrinated with these kinds of theories. I'm glad the veil's been lifted, but now our job is to do something about it. So I introduced legislation to say that not $1 should go to any school, K through graduate school, that teaches any of this garbage. And we're going to be fighting this, and I think this is going to be a central part of what we're campaigning on over the next year and a half.
I certainly hope so, because as I laid out in the monologue, this isn't, I mean, it's racist, and racism is horrific and horrendous enough, but this isn't just racialism. It's racialism used as a tool to usher in a Marxist revolution that is the reality of what critical race theory is. And those who practice it, like the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, the leaders of that movement, Patrisse Cullors specifically, admitted they are trained Marxists. They're trained Marxists, and we can see for ourselves that they're trying to tear down institutions like law enforcement and our criminal justice system, in addition to demonizing white people and our country in general. My question to you is this. The other politicos, whether that's Governor McAuliffe, whether that's liberal-leaning members of school boards, are they aware that they're taking part in a Marxist tactic? Are they aware that they are taking part in essentially the start of a Marxist revolution, or are they just ignorant racists? It seems to me it's a binary option.
Well, I think some of them are very much aware, right? I mean, we see this every day in the complete inexplicable positions that they take on border security, watching President Biden go over to Europe and go over to Putin and basically say, oh, sure, here are 16 areas where you can't hit us on cybersecurity, but hey, go ahead and hit us on all the other things. Literally, you can't make up. It's not incompetence, Liz. It can't just be incompetence, right? This has to be more sinister than that, because they are so literally off the mark in endangering our country with wide open borders and empowering cartels and endangering us and empowering Russia and empowering China and siding up with Iran instead of Israel. And now on this stuff, on indoctrinating our children to teach America is evil in order to have control over our kids. That is what this is about. It is about power. It is about control. I suppose there are some of my Democratic colleagues who buried their head in the sand. And let's be honest, there's some of my Republican colleagues who buried their head in the sand and ignore that this is going on. But, there's a reason that so many parents are now leaving their kids out of the public schools after they got them out in the last year and leaving them in homeschooling. And then so many parents that are fleeing and trying to find private schools. And that is why we need to radically change the system to empower parents, have the dollar follow the parent to get our kids out of these corrupt school systems. The footage you're showing, that may be from the Loudoun County public schools. I'm not sure, but I know that there was a terrible incident in Loudoun County. I was a product of that public school system. And I went there when it was rational, insane, and we loved America and we learned history. Liberal, Democrat, Republican, didn't matter. But now they are teaching our children that America is evil. They're teaching our children to believe that you have two mommies, or that, you may not be a boy or a girl, and all of these crazy things that the American people are sick of. And frankly, I'm glad that we now have that veil lifted. And I think there might be a blessing that came out of this absurdity with COVID. The American people now get the joke of what these bureaucrats are doing to them.
Right, because they can actually see how extreme and how radical and how Marxist these beliefs are. And you know what I believe? I believe that the people purporting this or perpetuating this do know what they're doing. I don't believe that there's a lot of people, a lot of Democrats or radical leftists operating in ignorance. I think that they truly believe that Marxism just hasn't been tried by the right person, and that America is fundamentally illegitimate, and that we should tear her down and replace her with a socialist structure. I think that the vast majority of people in the public sphere who are advocating for the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, AOC, cultural Marxists, Black Lives Matter, all that kind of stuff, I believe that they know what they're doing, and what they're doing is Marxism. It's Republicans who sometimes don't believe that the other side is as nefarious as they truly are. And it's incumbent on us Republicans to actually believe it when the evidence is put forth. Congressman, before I let you go, I do want to ask you about one thing you mentioned. You mentioned the military, and I'd love to get your take. There was a congressional hearing in which Congressman Banks was asking, I believe it was the Admiral of the Joint Chiefs, so the head of the Navy essentially, about critical race theory in the military, because he had recommended that all Navy sailors read Ibram X. Kendi, a very big proponent of critical race theory, his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. To me, the answer from the Navy Admiral was simply not good enough. It wasn't even close. In fact, do you consider his answer to be a national security risk?
Well, look, let me just tell you, I had the pleasure, because we get the honor as members of Congress to nominate individuals from our district to go to the academies. And I met with the parents and the folks that I had nominated, and they're so excited to go to West Point or go to the Naval Academy, go to Air Force. And I talked to their parents. And let me just say, the one thing that came up when I opened it up to questions after we celebrated and took pictures is they said, what can you do to stop what's going on in our academies and our Department of Defense? My son, my daughter, they're signing up to defend the United States of America. And many of these parents are veterans themselves or come from families of veterans. And they don't want their children going off to West Point or the Naval Academy and being taught this garbage. And frankly, I think people are saying enough. We don't want this. We don't want our military being turned into a social engineering experiment while the Chinese and the Russians, the Iranians laugh at us, right? And that's what's really the risk here. And this stuff is pervasive. I already mentioned the gentleman that was fired. I think he may have been reinstated. You might know better than I would, from Space Force, because he even raised these issues. But we've seen the indoctrination videos. I'm sure you've seen them out of the Air Force Academy and others, where they put out these videos with this social engineering stuff. And, you know, I can go through all of the list of things. And my friend Jim Banks was right to raise it. We should fire every one of these top brass that have anything to do with this. When Republicans get back in charge, we ought to radically overhaul the Department of Defense. We should stop sending them blank checks. I voted against the ongoing AUMF in Iraq today because I'm tired of 20-year endless war in Iraq under an authorization of force that we should revisit. We shouldn't be giving them a blank check to indoctrinate our military. And so I think we need to fire all of those responsible when we're back in charge and turn the Department of Defense back into an ass-kicking machine to kill enemies.
Amen to that. And I'm glad that we have an advocate in you, a representative of the people of our country and our great country in Congress fighting for that, versus what we see from, unfortunately, a lot of Democratic elected officials who are purporting Marxism, in my opinion, knowingly purporting Marxism. Congressman Chip Roy, thanks, sir, for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Liz, great to see you. Take care.
All right. When we come back, some very troubling video footage from Joe Biden's trip overseas. It's almost as if you wouldn't believe it unless you see it with your own eyes. So we're going to show you in just a moment. Stay with us. Well, I don't think anybody who watched President Joe Biden's overseas trip did so without cringing. If you're conservative, you probably cringed outwardly. But let's be real, even liberals were cringing inside themselves. I mean, I was one of the last people, I have to admit, I was one of the last people to talk about Biden's mental state because I thought it was mean. And I thought that there were policy things that we should be arguing about before we talk about his mental state. I thought, you know, that's not nice. Let's argue on policy. Let's not get personal. Well, I'm also the first one to admit that maybe I was wrong. Because take a look at some of these clips. These are not just gaffes. These are what I would consider to be serious national security risks. First up here is Joe Biden committing well, I'll let you watch it for yourself. Take a look.
What do you say to Vladimir Putin?
To answer the first question, I'm laughing too. Well, look, I mean, he has made clear that the answer is, I believe he has in the past essentially acknowledged that he was, there are certain things that he would do or did do. But look, when I was asked that question on air, I answered it honestly. But it's not much of I don't think it matters a whole lot in terms of this next meeting we're about to have. The second question was I'd verify first and then trust. And
do you ever feel so uncomfortable that your skin literally starts to itch? The first time I watched that video, my arms actually started to itch. Also, his laugh at the beginning of that video, did Kamala Harris teach him how to laugh in public? This is so cringeworthy, you would think that it couldn't get worse, but it does. Take a look at this video.
President Ramaphosa, President Moon, he just committed. And the President of South Africa. And the President of South Africa, as I said earlier. Oh, you did? I certainly did.
But you get mentioned twice. So.
I'll go over that again. Let me tell you, we're delighted. I'm going to say we're joined by Prime.
Did you hear that laughter? That's not laughing with Joe Biden. That is laughing at Joe Biden because he couldn't recall something that had happened just one moment before. Again, you think maybe, well, that's the worst of it. It's just that bad. Well, no. Now we're going to see Biden literally get lost. And before I show this video, let me just preface this with saying, I've been in big conference centers, big hotels. Sometimes you don't know which way to turn when you're in a big building, a big piece of infrastructure. In this video, Joe Biden gets lost in a tent. Watch.
How are your meetings going in Cornwall, Mr. President?
I beg your pardon?
How are your meetings going here in Cornwall?
Very well.
Come on.
Really nice evening. They always do.
Meanwhile, of course, as Joe Biden is fumbling around overseas, Russia is conducting the largest military exercises since the Cold War. This is just before President Biden met with Vladimir Putin. So with me now to discuss the implications for national security, he is the former chief of staff at the National Security Council, former CIA analyst, and now the president of the Center for Security Policy, my good friend, Fred Fleitz. Fred, good to see you.
Hey, Liz, good to be here.
All right, Fred, give me your analysis of this. First of all, Biden's meeting with Putin, and contrast that meeting with what Putin is doing on the national stage right now.
Well, look, Biden's people are going to say that there were major achievements at the summit. There were some minor ones. We agreed to exchange ambassadors again, start some arms control talks that Russia's probably going to dominate. But it's what happened after the summit that we really need to talk about. And you focused on it well. Biden looked terrible. He looked incompetent. He looked like he didn't know what he's talking about. He said that he laid out 18 areas where the Russians aren't allowed to conduct cyber attacks against in the U.S. Does that mean the rest of the country they can? You know, but the most stunning thing to me, Liz, was when Putin, who was vibrant and confident, he said that Biden called him and walked back the killer remark that Biden had made to ABC News. And then Putin went on to call the U.S. and the U.S. military killers. I mean, we gave Putin a platform where he spewed all this propaganda, all these lies about the U.S., and Biden, on the other hand, looked really, really weak.
He did look weak. I mean, I thought he looked beyond weak. First of all, apologizing to Vladimir Putin is something no U.S. president should do. The American people should not stand for that, to hear a U.S. president apologizing to Putin. But when you see these gaffes, when you see this seemingly mental incompetence from the president, how big of a national security threat or a national security risk do you consider that to be?
I think it's very serious, and I agree with you. This isn't laughing a matter. I don't like to talk about it, but this perception of weakness by the United States and the U.S. president is destabilizing. We know our enemies respect strength. Now, you may not have liked Donald Trump, but he was a strong, decisive president. We were a strong, decisive superpower under him. And I think the world is beginning to realize that that's not the case anymore under Joe Biden. They see a confused foreign policy, a foreign policy that's not serious, that's focused on climate change and social engineering. And you can imagine our enemies are just working very hard to find ways to exploit this.
Oh, I would think so. I mean, after that army recruitment video and that CIA, the woke CIA recruitment video came out, I would imagine Vladimir Putin gave all of his intelligence services the weekend off, because they certainly aren't going to have to work very hard to get around that kind of U.S. intelligence. Go back to what you said a moment ago, though, about this 16 or 18 areas of infrastructure that Joe Biden said, please, Mr. Putin, please don't attack us in these areas. First of all, if I'm Vladimir Putin, those are the exact areas that I attack, of course. Joe Biden's defenders say that that was his version of giving a red line to Vladimir Putin. Fred, do you have any confidence whatsoever that if Vladimir Putin does wage a cyber attack in one of those areas of infrastructure, those 16 or 18, that Joe Biden would consider it a red line crossed and would do anything about it in retaliation?
I don't think he'd do anything. And I don't like hearing Democrats make red lines. A lot of them were drawn during the Obama administration. They were all ignored, which weakened us more. And Putin almost laughed this off. He claimed that it's the U.S. committing cyber crimes and that Russia has asked for information against cyber criminals attacking Russia, and we wouldn't respond, which I think is laughable. But it just goes to show that Putin had no regard whatsoever for anything Biden said. This was a PR disaster in just about any way you look at it.
Right. And when Joe Biden says that America is back, diplomacy is back, I always want to ask, back to what? Back to what? Are we going back to President Obama and his apology tour? Are we going back to our adversaries taking advantage of us? Because I don't see a cohesive foreign policy strategy coming from him. What I see is him allowing adversarial nations to take advantage of us.
Well, America's back as a pliant member of the European Club, where Europeans have a veto over foreign policy, where our enemies know they can walk all over us. I hate to say, this is clearly going to be worse than the Obama years. I'm very worried where our national security is going.
Ugh, and that's so troubling to hear you say that, because you certainly have your finger on the pulse. Fred, thanks so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. It was great to talk to you. Up next, we're going to talk to Pastor Darrell Scott about Juneteenth. Stay with us. President Joe Biden signed a bill passed unanimously by Congress. He signed it today, making Juneteenth the 12th federal holiday in the United States. This is the first additional federal holiday since the 1980s. Kind of crazy to think about. I do want to bring in Pastor Darrell Scott. He's the author of Nothing to Lose, Unlikely Allies in the Struggle for a Better Black America. To discuss this, Pastor Scott, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So this is an interesting topic, I think. There's a couple of different perspectives to look at this. First of all, Congress voted unanimously to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. Obviously, Juneteenth, most people know this, I think. It's when the slaves in Texas heard that they were free men. This came 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. Is this a good thing to make this a federal holiday? If so, why or why not?
What people don't know is that actually this legislation began during the Trump administration and was advanced and crafted by members of the Trump administration. I was involved in it at that time. Darrell Smith, I think, wrote the policy. And it was something that President Trump was going to do. Remember when he came back and had that rally, and it was on June the 20th, but he was going to have it in Tulsa on June the 19th, on Juneteenth. He was going to introduce or present the legislation then. It was all planned, but it was such a hoopla by the Democratic Party and by his opponents. And it was around that time when the riots and different things were going on that over George Floyd, that because of the negativity surrounding his participation in this Juneteenth event, he decided to table it. But it's not, Joe Biden is simply signing off on something and once again taking credit for something that really Donald Trump deserves a lot of credit for.
Right. And I think it's an example, too. Once again, the Democrats are being hypocritical because the Democrats want to celebrate this day, and it is cause for celebration. I think there's really no argument to be made that it's not. But the Democrats, at the same time that they want to celebrate this, they demonize Abraham Lincoln. They demonize, they don't want to talk about the Emancipation Proclamation being something that came from Republicans at the time. Do you believe that the Democrats being involved in this, voting for this, President Biden signing this into law, is this being done in good faith? And when I say good faith, I mean we want to celebrate that our nation, which was participating in a great evil, triumphed over that evil and course corrected? Or is it something in bad faith where they want to act like this is something that we currently suffer from?
It's politics, pure and simple. A number of members of the Democratic Party were aware of the fact that President Trump was going to introduce legislation regarding this, and they were determined to oppose it through negativity in the public space. But they're doing it for politics. They've got their eye on maintaining, securing the black vote, and they want to rack up as many as what they consider to be accomplishments that Joe Biden can point to or that the Democratic Party can point to in trying to keep that racist narrative alive and keep the Republican as the face of racism in this country and use it for them. They don't care about the people. They don't care about the celebration. It's all politics right here. That's it, pure and simple.
Well, that's interesting that you said, I mean, obviously I agree with you that the Democrats are trying to secure the black vote. They're fundamentally insulting to black Americans. I mean, we know Joe Biden is the one that said during the campaign that if you don't know if you're voting for Trump or for me, then you ain't black. So assuming that every black person thinks the same way, which is insulting and demeaning. But will something like this, will signing this into law, making Juneteenth a federal holiday, will that actually secure the black vote for Biden?
No, it won't. And that's what he thinks. He thinks black people are a monolith, but it won't do anything. Let me tell you something. If people got upset when President Trump said it, black people weren't paying any attention to Juneteenth prior to President Trump going to have his rally in Tulsa on that day. And then the uproar began. Oh, wait, Juneteenth. Oh, that was the day that they might have looked in an almanac or something and figured it out. Listen, I'm black. I've been black for 62 years. we weren't paying any attention to Juneteenth. Most black people didn't even know anything about Juneteenth. And then when President Trump said, hey, I'm the one that made Juneteenth popular, they got upset, but it's the truth anyhow. And this is barely causing a ripple in the black community right now. I mean, they'll talk about it today. They won't even talk about it tomorrow or the day after. It's not, if it gets you a day off of work with pay, then fine. If it doesn't, they don't. That's all it is.
That's pretty
Nobody's
funny,
paying
Pastor.
attention to it.
That's very funny. I mean, like I said, I'm not opposed to celebrating America triumphing over evils that we've participated in when we have improperly applied our founding principles, which we have, obviously, of course, especially in the sense of how our nation has treated racial minorities. There's no question of that. But one of the things that I always think when I think of days like this, Juneteenth, for example, is that this is what makes America exceptional, because what other nation in the world has come from such error and such sin and been able to actually create a situation where we're in now, where everyone is equal under the law? That, I think, is cause for celebration.
You're absolutely right. And America as a nation, even though we did participate in that heinous activity known as slavery, that institution, it was for less than 100 years. And in comparison with any other nation that practiced slavery, we did it, and it was controversial from the very beginning. There was an anti-slavery faction in America from the very beginning, and that anti-slavery faction ultimately prevailed. And for that, we need to congratulate and celebrate our nation in endeavoring to live up to the principles that it was founded upon.
Well, I think that's where it's incumbent on us, probably, meaning conservatives. It's incumbent on conservatives to make sure that this new holiday is not co-opted for politics, is not co-opted by the radical left, is not used to advance their racially divisive message, but it's used to actually celebrate our nation for the triumphs that we have achieved, because it really is. I mean, I'm proud to be an American. I'm proud of what we've achieved, what we've overcome, and I feel like our country can face anything and overcome anything because of what we have done in that area in the past. Pastor Scott, thank you for your perspective. I really appreciate it, sir.
Thanks for having me. God bless you.
All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about school choice and what is being taught to young children in school. We have a video that is very unpleasant to see, but it's illustrative of this need for reform. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Okay, for this next segment, I'm going to start out with a disturbing video. This was a video that actually went viral on Twitter, and you'd be horrified, absolutely disgusted at how many people applauded what was going on in this video, the exploitation that was happening in this video. I'm not going to describe it further. I just want you to watch it for yourself. But if you have children in the room, you probably don't want to show them this. Take a look.
We all need this confidence in life.
This little girl was twerking, as you could plainly see. This is a sexualized version of dancing. I don't need to explain that to you. A particularly horrifying part, I thought, was when an adult pretended to smack the bottom of this child. What this tells us, obviously, is that there's an over-sexualization of children in America, and we have to ask ourselves why. Because I don't think very many normal Americans, whether you're Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal, want this for our daughters. I mean, I have a 5-month-old daughter. I can't fathom someone trying to sexualize this dear, sweet, innocent little girl. The same with the girl you saw on that screen. So how do we stop this? How do we eradicate this? How do we protect our little girls from being treated like sex objects instead of the precious little girls that they are? With me now to discuss this is Lenny McAllister. Lenny, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks for having me.
Let's start first with your reaction to this video. I mean, I was disgusted, obviously, shocked to see so many people on Twitter applauding this display.
Look, I remember my daughter is not as young as your daughter is, and congratulations, by the way. But I am a dad of a daughter, and I remember when she was little and how precious she was. And one of the things that people used to ask me all the time is, why is she so well mannered? She's intelligent. She treats herself like a lady. What did you do when she was a teenager? I said, well, I didn't teach her how to be a lady when she was a teenager. I started teaching her how to be a lady as soon as she could talk and walk. I talked to her like she was a lady from the moment she can remember, and it was something all the way through. I have 3 sons. I did the same thing with them. Teach them how to open doors for their mother and their sister. Teach them how to respect women from the moment they can try to open a door at 2 and 3 and 4 years old. These are values that you teach throughout life, whether it's in the home and then subsequently in the school environments that they're taught with the type of environments that they're seeing when it comes to media and the like. This is something that's ongoing throughout life. It's just unfortunate that we're extolling this as some type of value when we should be teaching the preciousness of what being a lady is all about. And it's not twerking at 3 and 4 years old, regardless of how quote unquote cute somebody may think it is.
Right, and it really warms my heart, by the way, to hear that you've taught your daughter to be a lady, and to hear that you're teaching your sons, or you taught your sons to be gentlemen. That's the kind of young man that my daughter will be allowed to date at some point. But I think too, in the larger scheme of things. So when I see this video, I obviously feel sorry for this girl. She's being exploited. I wonder where on earth are this girl's parents who allowed her to be exploited like this. But also in a larger cultural sense, we're seeing so much of this radical sex ed, this sexualization of children, indoctrinated into children in the public school systems. There's a curriculum in the state of California that's teaching kindergartners that they can be transgender, that they can be a boy if they want to be a boy, or a girl if they want to be a girl. It's teaching 6th graders about, I believe, anal sex and bondage, very extreme radical sex education, graphic sex education, vulgar sex education. How do we get rid of that in the public school system beyond parents just speaking out? To me, the obvious answer seems school choice, but it seems like that hasn't, that element choice hasn't caught on in the argument for voucher programs.
Well, it hasn't caught on in quite that context yet, but I do think, Liz, it is catching on. I think the pandemic has shown people exactly what they've been getting out of the traditional public school system and why you have to have school choice, whether it's with public charter schools, such as the coalition that I help run, or you start looking at other options such as tax credit scholarships and the like. Parents are starting to realize that they want to have more control over what their kids learn and when they learn it. I mean, sex education is something that obviously every American child needs to go through, but at an appropriate level and at the pace that the parent wants that child to go through, as well as what that child can handle. You know, what a child may be able to handle at 9 is different than 11, than different at 13, and it's different from child to child. That's the reason why education has to be the best fit for each child from an academic standpoint. But one of the things we emphasize here at the Pennsylvania Coalition of Public Charter Schools is school choice also has to be a best fit for the developmental needs of the child, so that that child can develop into being a contributing American, can be somebody that can be a lady or a gentleman, somebody that can be connected to the economy, and somebody that can be a contributing member of society for decades to come. Now, in this instance, we're talking about sex education, but you can extrapolate this across every aspect of education. You got to have the best developmental fit for each child so that they can learn appropriately and have that foundation to move forward throughout life.
Right. And I mean, all I can say is amen to that. You guys are doing incredible work on this in Pennsylvania, but it seems to me, I don't quite understand actually why school choice as a policy initiative hasn't caught fire until this year. I can certainly understand why it caught fire after Zoom school in 2020, but I don't understand why conservatives haven't pushed this, because it seems to me that if we as a nation if we as a conservative movement, I should say, want to take back the cultural institutions that the radical left has hijacked, and I'm talking about the public school systems, the university systems, the traditional family, marriage, if we want to take back these institutions, then we have to have the next generation understand the value of these institutions. And there's no way that we're going to have a young generation understanding the wisdom of the way that our federal government was set up, or understanding the wisdom of a 2-parent family and its effect on children in poverty, until we actually are teaching those things in school. And we're not going to be able to teach those things in a public school as long as teachers' unions are in charge of them, and as long as parents don't have the capacity to remove their child and their child's money from schools that are brainwashing them.
Well, Liz, it's to your point. People did not really see what was actually being taught in the schools until you had Zoom school, sitting at home with people that were not used to teaching online and people that were trying to retrofit their curriculum into a different type of environment going through the stress of the pandemic. They are now seeing, as parents empowered across the country, that school choice matters in order to not just see what their kids are learning and see where the gaps are, but also understand why they're learning it at the pace that they need to learn it and how they need to be involved. Moving forward, we have to make sure we're pushing for policies because the wreck to our kids' school years came over the last 2 school years. The academic and developmental reckoning that our kids are going to go through as a result of the pandemic is these next 2 school years. And if we're not careful and we're not intentionally involved, our kids are at risk of being lost for a generation. And we just can't do that if we're going to compete geoeconomically or geopolitically for the next several decades to come.
Right. I mean, we can't afford to let our children as individuals get indoctrinated, but we also can't afford to let our country be run by children who have been indoctrinated. It's incredible. Jesse is obviously excellent on calling out the communist strains in the agenda of the left, and I think this is a perfect example. If we want to eradicate the cultural Marxism that's pervading our society, we have to take back the school systems. Lenny, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you, Liz. God bless.
And when we come back, we have something just to lighten up the mood a little bit today. Stay with us. Okay, and now it's the time of the show that Jesse laughs at things. Since Jesse's not here, I thought maybe we should laugh at Jesse. So I thought I'd leave him a bowl of vegan chili on his desk for when he returns. Just kidding. I ate it all. Of course, I'm not going to leave him any of that. Instead, let's watch this video. This is Bo Burnham, his Netflix special called Inside, and it's interesting because he filmed the whole thing just in one room during COVID-19. Take a look at this.
Latte foam art, tiny pumpkins, fuzzy comfy socks, coffee table made out of driftwood, a bobblehead of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a needlepoint of a fox, some random quote from Lord of the Rings, incorrectly attributed to Martin Luther King. Is this heaven, or am I looking at a white woman? A white woman's Instagram. White woman. A white woman's Instagram. White woman.
Here's my question watching that. By the way, my producers did not show me that video before we played it on this segment, so this is my hot take on this. My question is, did he have all of those things in his house before he filmed this video? Is this actually where he lives and he's just pretending this is white woman Instagram? I'm happy to say that I don't think I have any of those things in my home, so there you go. Very clever of him. On that note, thank you so much for having me today. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. You can subscribe to my show, The Liz Wheeler Show, at lizwheelershow.com, or connect with me on Twitter at Liz_Wheeler, or on Locals at lizwheelershow.com/locals. Till next time.